Okay, welcome to H3 Health, Happiness, and Hope. My name is the Acapellist. I am do this show with Brother Scott Sweetman. He's not with us quite yet, but he will be shortly. And so glad you're here. Today we're going to talk about messaging you get from a medical professional and how that could be so damaging for you if the messaging is um unfavorable, if the messaging is you're going to die in 2 months, that kind of a scenario, and how your belief of what your medical status is going to be far more important than what your doctor believes. So I'm going to tell you about James and his story. James was is he's with us still. He's still alive. James is a young gentleman I just met recently, and he's had quite a journey recovering from his health, for that he was told like 10 years ago that he would not walk again, he would not live again, like he would die in very short order, these kind of messages. And similar to Brother Scott Sweetman, he was told like 10 years ago that he'd be dead in like 2 months. So he's still here with us as well. He's not on here yet, but he will be soon. And so the point, I guess, that we want to kind of discuss in this show is about the power of your thoughts and how that influences your health. You probably know this already, but there is a thing called a placebo effect. And a placebo effect is basically related to, if you think a drug or some kind of a healing modality is going to heal you, it will. If you think that it won't, well, it won't. And so when they're testing drugs against a placebo, a lot of times they only beat the placebo. The drug only beats the placebo by 2 or 3%, like a very, very small margin. So if 45% of the people had a benefit from taking the placebo and 47% of the people had a benefit when they were taking the actual drug, they say, oh, look at this drug, how effective it is. Well, 45% of them, the drug wasn't doing it. The thoughts about the drug were doing it, right? What they believed to be the case. So I'm going to start. I'm not sure where Scott is, but he'll be along shortly. And I'll tell you James' story as best as I can. I was going to invite James on, but he decided he had other commitments, so he couldn't be here. But maybe we'll have him on for a future show. So, James, when he was a week after his 18th birthday, he was in Hawaii and he was surfing. And he was surfing, and it was amazing, and it was beautiful and an incredible activity, and it just loved it, right? How could you go wrong surfing in Hawaii, right? 18 years old, he's a football player, he's a hockey player, very fit young man, at probably the peak of his physical fitness. Maybe better now, maybe, but 18 is kind of reminding me of that song Like a Rock, by Bob Seger. Like a rock, I was standing straight and tall like a rock. Something like that is what the song goes. Anyways, this young, strong, vital person who's doing this beautiful activity out there surfing. And then when he's surfing, then basically he goes through the day and it was all fine. And then the next morning he gets up and he was falling, like fell down and fell down and fell down. It's like, wow, what's going on with this, right? So then as it progressed, his situation progressed, he basically became paralyzed. He couldn't use his legs at all. From his waist down wouldn't work at all. And he was in the bed. He couldn't move his legs, couldn't do anything like that. And so that was obviously very disconcerting. So he had a medical team there that was assisting him. And they were, well, first of all, it was, yeah, just wait. Tomorrow it'll probably get better. Well, it didn't get better. It got worse and it got worse and it got worse. So he became paralyzed. He then tried to the medical team just basically kept on telling him that, oh yeah, you have this condition. It's not very well known. There's only about 20 people in the world that suffer this, and 19 of the 20 die. All of them are become paraplegics or quadriplegics, all of them have this kind of a outcome, and none of them live, or 19 of them, 19 die, but all 20 will have uh, a limitation on their mobility. Their legs won't work. They're a paraplegic or a quadriplegic. So James he's being told by the medical team, and there's a bunch of them that are telling him, "Oh yeah, well, sorry, James, this is kind of where your life is going to end up now. You're never going to walk again. You're never going to run again. You're never going to move again. You're never going to have the loose use of your legs." So James did not listen to that messaging. What James did is he believed that he would heal himself, and he took every opportunity, everything that came his way that would support it. As an example, physiotherapy, physical treatment in that regard. He took every one of them that came up. He had a bedmate, or like somebody staying in the same room as him, who was paralyzed to do with a motorcycle accident. No, maybe it was a car accident, a vehicle accident. He was disabled because of a vehicle accident. And then with that vehicle accident, he was very bitter and very angry and wouldn't participate in any of the rehab, anything like that. He was kind of like, I guess, fixed in terms of where he had been before, and very resentful, very angry that he's in this new position with this lack of mobility. James, a little bit different scenario with James. James basically, just kind of acknowledged where he was, but then believed that he would get better, and he was going to take every effort to get better. He was going to push himself to get better, to get his mobility back. And the medical team were always super negative towards him. Like, just the messaging was always, "Oh yeah, no, you're done. This is never going to change," kind of a thing. And so then at one point he regained enough use that he could stand. So he stands, and then the medical people say, "Oh, wow, that's surprising. But even though you're standing, you'll never ever walk again." And then when he could walk, they say, "Oh, well, that's surprising, but you know what? You can walk, but you'll never be able to run again." And then he ran again. So basically, over the course of, well, it's been 10 years now since that incident occurred. And basically, what he has surmised happened is that a rogue wave hit him when he was on the surfboard, like when he's sitting on the surfboard, and the rogue wave hits him, and somehow that causes some kind of compression in the base of his spine. And then that compression is what was actually causing his signals not to go through to his legs, right? His nervous system wasn't working like it should. And then that nervous system wouldn't allow the impulses to get to the legs to allow him to function. So he goes and he just like sticks at it, and he keeps on doing the physio, keeps on doing the work. And at every juncture, the medical professionals are telling him, "Oh no, yeah, that's not going to happen for you. No, you're going to be disabled." That was the messaging he was getting. But he kept at it. And then what basically happened, he kept more and more mobility. So this has been 10 years since that incident occurred. He's 28 years old now, and he is he's vibrant guy. When I'm having a Zoom talk, he's standing while I'm talking to him. He walks fine. He says when he runs, he's got a little bit of a unusual gait that, over time, I'm sure is going to straighten out, or his body's going to find a different way, right? So that's basically the story of James. So why am I sharing this story with you? Well, I think that it's something that we sometimes believe too highly in the opinion of a medical professional. My friend Scott, if he's coming on here, don't know where he is. Maybe he got waylaid somehow. But Scott, he had a similar thing. He's had poor health for quite a period of time. And in many cases, the medical professionals wouldn't even give him treatment, wouldn't provide surgery, wouldn't provide him services, because they basically wrote him off. Hang on one second. Hello, Michelle. Okay. I'm in the middle of the show here, but yeah, I could do that. Okay, no problem. I will send this over right away. I'm sending, he wants it via email. All right, will do. Thank you. All right, that was Michelle, my colleague with White Knight Media. Her and Scott run White Knight Media. And apparently, the producer of this show failed to send the link to Scott. Oh my goodness, we're going to have to fire that guy if he can't keep his shit together. Anyways, Scott will be on momentarily. And then we will carry on with our story about James, and Scott will tell you a little bit about his experience as well. So, James, young man, fit, strong, athlete, goes and has this rogue wave hit him. It does some kind of compression in his spine that prevents his legs from working. He is told repeatedly that he'll never walk again. He'll probably die young. He won't be able to stand, he won't be able to walk, he won't be able to run. And he has proved them all wrong because he's walking and running and standing today. So, amazing story recovery. And I mentioned about the placebo effect. The placebo effect is certainly a big deal. And as I said, with the placebo effect, you only need the placebo versus the drug test. They only need a couple points better than the placebo in order to say, hey, this drug is effective. Brother Scott, how are you doing?
Oh, now that I have Link, I hear you. I was listening to you. I just couldn't get in. I didn't have a link, brother. Sorry.
Oh, all right. No
Jesse,
worries.
glad
you're here.
Jesse sent me a link, I think. So thanks, Jesse. You
probably sent me a link.
I got lots of links.
You got
I'm here.
You're here. So I've already told the whole James story. Like you might not have heard that, right? Or
I heard parts of it. Yeah, I did.
Okay. So just to summarize, 18-year-old guy, healthy, fit athlete. He's in Hawaii, gets hit by this rogue wave and doesn't think much of it. And he got hit by a wave. And then the next morning he gets up and then he falls and he keeps falling all the time. He's dizzy. He can't stay on his feet. He's that kind of a thing. And then, so he goes to get checked out and the medical folks say, yeah, well, hopefully it's going to be better tomorrow. And then when they come back tomorrow, they said, man, we got bad news for you. There's 20 people in the world this happens to, surfing like this and having this kind of pressure or impact from this wave. And basically 20 of the 20 never walk again. 19 of the 20 will die in short order, kind of a thing. Their body will just shut down, kind of a thing. So this is the message he's told. James believes none of it. He just kind of keeps on doing all of the physio, doing the rehab, making new connections, right? Making his brain make new connections to get the signals where they have to go, kind of a thing. And then ultimately, now 10 years later, he has a little bit of a lingering with his stride. When he runs, it's a little bit off, kind of a thing. But other than that, he stands, he walks, he moves, he's all cool. And so the point that I was getting at is the power of our belief or to kind of heal us, one, but two, how harmful medical professionals can be if they just look up the thing and say, yeah, we don't care what, you are, what you're like. According to this stat, you're going to die or you're going to be paralyzed. Now, Scott, you had a similar experience, did you not?
Well, yeah, I suppose everyone's experience is definitely different, but yeah, I've been in a situation where they look you in the eye and say, yeah, you're not going to make it till the morning, kind of thing. So, yeah, that's quite a situation to be in. I think we all sometimes maybe imagine what we would do in that kind of case, but it happens just out of the blue, even when you don't expect it. For me, I was like a week and a half before I climbed the wall of Ankara Castle in Turkey. I was on a mission with the Japanese government, taking an exhibit to Constantinople and Ankara, and yeah, perfectly fine, healthy, doing great. And then under 2 weeks later, they were loading me into a meat wagon, and they were were cracking me and doing all kinds of things, and told Fleur that basically I was a dead man, and the only thing they could do was try and put me in coma and slow everything down. My lungs had already shut down, and my renal system would be next, and then my pulmonary system. So
you were on life support for how long there in Japan?
Oh, almost 4 months, maybe a little longer in total. I was in induced coma for
Yeah.
most of that.
And during that period of time while you're in this coma, your body started gaining weight like crazy, right? Is that correct?
Yeah. It was now it sort of makes sense. It was, well, there was a bacteria that had started in my lungs and then spread and it was untyped, so they didn't have any information on it, and there was a whole bunch of other things going on. And about and I get a little hazy because they brought me out of it twice basically. And they don't it's not so simple as just turning off the medicine like in
Mm,
movies, right? They just like turn the medicine off and then yeah, it doesn't work that way. They have to actually bring you out of it. There's a process. And the first time they tried to bring me out of it, they couldn't get me out safely, so they put me back in. And then they brought me out one time and I was awake for about a day and a half, and then my system started crashing again. So I remember them, saying, hug your kids, play with your family, in 2 hours, we're going to be putting you under again. And just not really having any concept of what was going on. And then somewhere along the third part of it, I got, in conjunction with this other bacteria, RM, the superbug that hospitals have. What's it called
oh,
again?
yeah. RMSA or something like that?
Yeah, something like, yeah. They still test for it. Whenever I go in for an operation, they have to test for it, see if it's active. We all have it, basically.
Mm,
It's just whether it's inactive or inactive. And it can kill you because antibiotics don't help. And so I had crazy high fevers. And there was one night that they had me on ice. Literally, I was in an ice bath. And they were pouring ice on top of me, and it was melting as fast as they could put ice on me. And
wow.
they said I was gonna have brain damage or die, and so I asked for a priest to come up, and he came up, and sort of I was in and out of consciousness, and a few days later, I don't know, time when you're in that situation, it's really hard to judge time, right? But at that point, didn't see any brain damage when I woke up. I had to learn to speak again. I had to learn to feed myself again. I had to learn to walk again, talk again, all those things. Um, but they think that the doctor now that's treating me thinks that my fever was so high it damaged my pituitary gland, which
Mm,
went unknown, right? They were more concerned about cognitive abilities and
right.
was I going to be able to function again? And she thinks now there's two doctors that are working on it, that my pituitary gland is basically fried, and the pituitary gland does so many different things. But it was after that point, to answer your question, that I started to gain phantom weight. I was on a tube at that point. I wasn't,
Right.
I was gaining weight on this mush, and they controlled, of course, the calories. They give you completely all calculated. And I started gaining that way. And when I came out awake again because of the MRSA, my weight started crashing. I started to lose weight like crazy, and they said you have to eat. And at that point, I didn't eat. And so they had me eating a lot of calories, and then my weight went crazy, and then they shut it down again, and they put me on a liquid, very low calorie, whatever, and still gaining weight. Like they didn't really, they couldn't figure out what was happening because I was gaining weight on no calories. I should have been continuing losing weight. So yeah, then my weight went crazy and went way up. I learned later that there's other problems, but they've been addressing those, and that's good too.
Hmm. So you've had more than one medical professional tell you you're going to die. You're not going to be here much longer. You've had that happen more than once. Recently,
Yeah,
when you're going to get surgery, if I recall correctly, you went all the way to Edmonton for the surgery, and the
yeah,
surgeon just said, "Yeah, no, I'm not going to operate on you. You're going to be dead in 6 months." Right? Was
yeah.
something like
No,
that?
yeah. So the in Japan wasn't so bad. There was only twice out of the six times that I was awake. The other four times they told Fleur, my family, say goodbye. He won't be here in the morning. Called my mom, put my mom in the hospital because of the stress, actually.
Mm,
And morning would come, and I would still be there gasping and fighting, and the machines all going. And yeah, I didn't. and we should talk a little bit about why I think that I did survive. It's interesting. But yeah, then after I came back to Canada and we were getting treatment, I went up to Edmonton, the bariatric clinic, and because the doctors here, same thing, diet was incredibly low, still gaining weight, couldn't lose the weight, didn't make any sense. Sent me up there, and at that time I'd lost, at the highest, I was about 620 pounds. And I know that's really hard to imagine. And that's not like when you see on the internet, you see somebody that looks like this mountain of flesh. I mean, I was still functioning and doing things and whatever, but it's huge. Um, and I went and see him, and I was expecting they were going to, talk about the operations they could do and things that could help. And he was, Canada's best. He's published lots of, the kind of guy that you expect is going to come in there and say, yeah, here, we're going to do this and you're going to be fine.
Yeah.
And yeah, it was far from that. He didn't really examine me, just looked at my chart, checked my weight twice. And he said, there's nothing we can do here. He said, you're going to die. And Fleur and I were just like, I still remember that moment. There was like no molecules moving in the air. It was just like, he just looked at us and said that in a matter of fact, like, oh, I like pie. Way there was no emotion or gee, I'm sorry or nothing. It was just, he said it's going to happen one of two ways. You're going to fall and break a hip or a bone, and then because of your size, we won't be able to treat the infection, and you'll die of infection. Or he said you're going to get a skin-eating disease from the extra skin you have. It's going to get infected. You're going to get a skin-eating disease, and you're going to die from that. And he said, there's just nothing that we can do to help you. And again, silence. And finally, I sort of blurted out, well, what do you mean? There has to be something that, I'm here, breathing, walking, talking. What can we do?
Yeah.
And he's like, I've told you, there's nothing we can do. And of course, he left. He just got up and left. And thanks, Dr. Sharma. I can say your name. Anyway, and luckily his second in command came in, or another doctor came in. Their organization was a bit chaotic at that time, kind of caustic. They were fighting with each other. We found out as we spent more time there. And she said, yeah, he's got a strange way of dealing with people. She said, basically, he's an academic. He doesn't really handle treatment. She's stuff he can do. And so a big sigh of relief. And she said, yeah, because my doctor here, whom I trust and love and who saved my life, definitely, Dr. Claire Forstall and Dr. Collins, they're like, I'm healthy. I have great blood work. I have diabetes. I don't have any comorbidities. I have this problem now that we know is with my pituitary gland, and it causes problems with weight. That causes problems with pain. People think when you lose weight, it feels good. Not when you get to a certain point. And like me, I didn't grow up heavy. So my bone structure underneath isn't designed to hold the weight. The weight's an artificial thing. And I'm not judging other people. Everyone's got their own reasons, right? But a lot of people who have weight issues and other issues we don't know about don't have a choice in it, right? So you know people like that. And so yeah, that was kind of the start. And tried a bunch of stuff and didn't work. Kind of worked, lost about 90 pounds, a bunch of extra skin. Sorry if it grosses anyone else or triggers you. It's just my personal experience. So
sure. Yeah.
And it's a little hard to talk about, a little embarrassing, I guess. And it's so funny because it's social. If I had, and I've thought this a few times, if I had cancer, if I had, cerebral palsy or something like this, people would be understanding. But because my illness is inside a little gland in my head, that was damaged, but the outward appearance of it, you know, I've had people come up in front of my kids, and we've talked about that before, and say, you know, why don't you get some exercise, you fat, you know, and stop eating so much, you know, and just really horrible stuff that has nothing to do with my experience. But
Well,
yeah,
like what's shocking really, how our bodies are amazing, but when they go awry, in your case, you're being fed, they're controlling the calories, and you gain, 200 or 300 pounds while they're controlling the calories that say there's no way that can happen, right? Every body's going to use 2,000 calories a day or 2,500 calories a day. They're dialing you in at 2,000 calories, let's say, and you gain weight like crazy. Like, it makes no sense, right? I
yeah,
mean,
they calculate every body uses a certain amount of calories, right? And when you weigh a certain amount, the number's huge. It's like 4,000 calories or 5,000 calories just to maintain that weight, right? So it seems really simple. Like, that's a lot. Like, I couldn't eat that much food. But and we've talked a little bit about it before, but there's a really interesting doctor that my aunt and uncle went to from South America, and he had been in a death camp there. And one of the things he noticed is how some people thrived and some people died on the same condition, same diet. And there was no like, as a doctor, he could sort of say, okay, that person's health is very poor. They're likely not going to survive the trauma and the starvation and those things. And often that person would. And then somebody else, so this, young, healthy, good, and they wouldn't survive. They would starve to death. Same diet, right? And Dr. Valenzuela was his name. He wrote a great book, and I'll share it with you. I can't remember the title right now. And he really spent, after that experience, he finally got out. He really started researching about how our predisposition to survival overcomes all of those things. Like, the science is one thing. This person should live, this person should die. Why does this person die and this person live? No scientific rationale behind it, right?
mm-hmm.
Which is what you're talking about. And he spent a lifetime researching it, and all of his research pointed to the fact that we control our reality. And I know that for me, when I was in coma, I had the most horrific dreams about dreams, not dreams. They're reality when you're in them, when you're in coma. They're not a dream. They are the same as this. We are. But my family getting kidnapped and murdered, and I remember one of these things that were going on when I remember them all, unfortunately, and the twins were taken out in a boat and sealed in a plastic bag and thrown overboard, and I could see them drowning in this thing. And when I woke up, I had all these horrible nightmares. I made the mistake of when I was in the hospital in Edmonton getting operated on, I shared one of these experiences with a social worker, and she immediately called all these people in to see me. Fortunately, when she came, the priest was there visiting there, my aunt and uncle were there, and the person could see that I was not crazy, that I was quite well adjusted, and I wasn't having hallucinations. But I really think that I had all of these things. My subconscious was making me fight. It was turning on that fight, because there's the whole time when I was in coma, I was protecting my family and horrible things. And the only thing that I can think of is that part of my mind was shaking another part of me and saying, don't give up. Right. Don't you dare give up. We can beat this, and I think ultimately that's why I did, despite the fact that medically I should have a long time ago.
Yeah. Wow. Our bodies are so incredible. Hey, we got like 50 trillion cells, and we got like 500 trillion combination of bacteria and parasites and like all kinds of all kinds of critters that would normally be kind of regarded as negative things. But when everything's working right, they have this symbiotic relationship, right? And the bacteria are providing what your other cells need. And there's this, beautiful type of a relationship that exists, right? But when it goes awry, like in your case, my goodness. And then that was when you're in Japan, you
Yep.
had to leave there because of the big tidal wave, right? Because of the
Yeah.
earthquake and tidal wave that happened in Japan. And
Yeah, the anniversary was just recently, the big Fukushima. First, it was a huge tidal wave, and then that took out a nuclear reactor, which melted down. And it's still a problem, although not officially. We know people that are there, but tens of thousands of people killed. The tsunami hit, and they were there, and then they weren't there. And the videos are horrific. And we're talking like a quarter mile inland, like not just on the coast. This water just, it was like a grim reaper. It came and the people were gone.
wow.
I've never seen anything like it in my life.
Yeah. Horrible. Wow.
Yeah, and that's the other thing that is so interesting is the world we know, and we're really arrogant in that we think we know so much, right? As a species, we think boy, we've got this figured out. We sent people into space, and we can clone stuff, and all of this great sort of stuff in philosophy and art and all of these things. But boy, we're just tiny little critters when it comes right down to it, right?
And compared to nature, yeah, no kidding, eh? Like, I mean, a tidal wave, you see that coming. What exactly are you going to do besides run, right? I mean, it doesn't matter what kind of house or building or vehicle you have, like it ain't going to help you. So, no.
No, it took out they had built in most of the communities to the north, they had built flood walls that, according to science, should have stopped the tsunami, but it just took those out, didn't even slow down.
Hmm.
Like the video of it is just the big protective walls are there, and then they're not.
Yeah. Wow.
And I think tied in with that is the power of whatever's inside of us to affect our own reality,
Hmm.
right? Like
Mhm.
you were talking about the other fellow, and
James.
you and I, yeah, know lots of people that have come through it, and we have an amazing power that we don't usually tap into, I think.
Yeah, I agree. And you know what's really shocking as well, I think, is if there's a doctor, so they've done all this research, they've done all these things, and they know what the normal, here's the normal prognosis, that kind of a thing. But if basically they they don't have to kind of say, oh, well, according to the chart, 78% of the people who have this are going to die. They could frame it that this isn't always a death sentence. There's some people that survive it, and have hope, have faith that you're going to be one of the exceptions to the rule, right? And then so it's their power. They have a lot of power over our belief, right?
Mhm.
I meant I there was this gentleman I know, he was involved with seniors care, and there's seniors care in the facility or seniors care in their home. And when they had somebody come to the home, and then they had some kind of prognosis, they'd say, yeah, your prognosis is you're going to die in 3 months. And in 3 months they died. Like, that was kind of the way it worked. For the people that were at home and they were going out in the garden and playing with their grandkids and talking on the phone with their aunt, or doing those kind of things, they lived way longer because they just were too busy enjoying life, whatever days they had left, that they extended that lifetime, that prognosis by considerable margins, like 5 and 10 times, right? And same thing when you have somebody with a cancer diagnosis, and so they get diagnosed, they're going to die. You got 3 months to live, and the person comes back. They made some changes in their life, and whatever. Some things have been resolved, and they've kind of reinvigorated about living, kind of a thing. And 3 months they come back, and there's no cancer. It's all gone. And now you'd think the doctors in that situation would say, wow, we got to study this. We got to document this. We got to figure out what you did. But they just seems, in most cases, they're just disinterested. Oh, well, okay, good for you. And I'm off to the next patient to tell the same damn things, right? Like, wouldn't that be a story you'd want to share? I had a patient. That patient I told them they were not going to live more than 2 months because that's what the stats all show. And 2 years later, this person's still here. So, to the next patient, wouldn't that be encouraging news that would be valuable for them to hear, right?
I had a situation like that when I was 13. I started
Mhm.
bleeding internally. I was passing blood, uh,
Mm.
and they couldn't figure out why I was passing blood. So they put me in the hospital because it was getting pretty serious. I was losing a lot of blood, and they were running all kinds of tests. And I'd been to Edmonton and Calgary. I was living on our ranch outside of Bentley at the time. My parents were divorced, and but they would come together to try and figure out what was going on with me, obviously. And that's what I was telling you about my story about lowering my heart rate. When you're like,
Yes. Yeah,
you know,
yeah, yeah.
13 years old and a month in a hospital, you're kind of like, yeah, you get pretty bored. But my dad had a lot of problems with his stomach, ulcers and things, and he had found a doctor. There was ex Golden Gloves boxer, had huge hands, but he was a
Mm.
surgeon. It was funny, like when you saw this guy, he's like these big ham hock hands. You could never imagine him poking around inside of you, right? But no, he was a
Yeah.
great surgeon. And he said, yeah, he said, I've treated a couple of young people in a similar situation. And he said, I don't know why it works. And my colleagues will tell you that it doesn't work. He said, but both of them recovered.
Mm.
And he said, I don't know what's wrong with you. He said, but I have seen this before. And this is what we did.
Mhm.
And, mom and dad said, great. Doesn't like they're saying that if they can't stop the bleeding, he's going to die. you know so at that time I don't think I was that close to dying, but that's what they were telling them, is that obviously if you can't stop internal bleeding. And they had gone in and poked around and scoped me from one end to the other and radioed this and all sorts of stuff. Anyway, this doctor prescribed this course of treatment, and sure enough, in 6 months ish, the bleeding had stopped and it never ever came back. And
Mm.
fine. And he straight up admitted, and he was kind of funny that way because he wasn't a doctor's doctor. He was kind of like the old country doctor. He's like,
Mhm.
yeah, I don't know why, but
Mm.
this has worked in the past. Let's give it a try. And it worked. And
So
I think,
what kind of treatment was it? Like, what did you do?
yeah, it's
Oh, wait, is it too personal? You don't have to tell us if it's too personal.
yeah, it's not pleasant.
That's okay. We can move on. That's all right.
Yeah, yeah, it involved quarters. I was 13 and hadn't had any sort of university encounters with medicine at that time, but it was some sort of anti-inflammatory cocktail that
Mhm.
uh, involved an enema once or twice a day with this solution. It came in like from Edmonton, a pharmacy in Edmonton had to make it. And yeah, so at that time it was kind of traumatic, but the treatment was more traumatic than the bleeding for me.
Mm.
uh, but yeah, it worked, whatever. Whatever it did. And I was contacted by some organization with a big long Latin name that were trying to get whatever this was made into an actual illness, so
Mm.
that they could, then it goes into the doctor book. I forget what that's called. And then other doctors can prescribe the medicine, right?
Mm.
Like they're not supposed to prescribe off book, it's called.
Right. DSM, I think it's DSM-5 is the I believe the diagnostic services model. That's like their big library to put a label onto somebody, kind of a thing. And then
Yeah.
you're right. Then the drugs that are associated with that label, then they can be prescribed. But if they're not part of that label, then they can't be used generally, right? So they'd be, yeah, off
Yeah.
indication, or not on indication, I guess is the word, I think. So
Yeah, and that's what this doctor, this ex-boxer, was said to us. Is he said the other doctors are going to tell you that it won't work, that it's got no bearing on anything. He said, but I've seen it work. So if you want to
yeah.
try it, I'll set it up. It was a little difficult at that time because it had to be made up uh, into these vial things, one dose things, and yeah, but it worked. So I don't know why, but I've encountered many times, and I have tremendous respect for medicine and doctors and healers and healing. But I think somewhere we've gotten so locked in, and maybe it's because of liability, maybe it's because of I don't know, social reasons, lots of reasons. But most doctors today can't be healers, right? And a lot of that's time. Like we're in a really horrible situation in Lethbridge where we're short doctors. If you need a doctor and you're new to our community, forget it. It's, walk in forever, maybe.
Well, if I could point out, like, just for our viewers, there is TELUS Mobility Health that every Albertan has access to. So even if you don't have a doctor, you can connect with there, and often you get to see a doctor and see over the Zoom or internet connection, see them like within a couple hours sometimes, or a day. So it's not like if you don't have a doctor, give up hope. You can still use that service and get to a doctor. I have clients sometime and they have a benefit plan that requires a doctor's prescription for a massage, let's say, right? And some insurers, they make that a requirement, and some of them make it based on group size. A bigger group doesn't have to have that restriction. But those that do, then a lot of times they're not using their massage benefit because they don't have a prescription, because they don't have a doctor. But use that whole TELUS Health Mobility thing, and then you can get your doctor's prescription that way, and then utilize your benefit program, right?
Have you ever used telehealth?
Yeah, it works really good.
Yeah, I have too, and it's I found it to be great, especially in conjunction with other doctors. Like,
Oh yeah,
my doctor in Edmonton, I was out of it. I was under when she did all her tests in Edmonton. I was under. I've never met her. I know her voice, and I've never seen her face. She could walk by me, and definitely she saved my life. I've gone down over 200 pounds and getting my health back and things because of her. But yeah, which is a different model, right? When I grew up, the family doctor in our small town of Bentley, he knew everyone. I'm sure it was quite hard for him to go to a church dinner when he had, seen most of us naked and poked us and done all these things. But yeah, different model. Things are changing, right?
Yeah, and unfortunately, like what often happens are medical professionals get where they have a revenue requirements they have to generate for their clinic or their hospital or those kind of things, right? And so you go see the doctor and it's like 3 minutes in and here's the prescription pad and you're out the door, right? And drugs often have side effects. Like I think everybody would agree, for a life-threatening condition, for a short-term thing, drugs are amazing, right? Like that they allow you to heal, but they're not, I don't believe, ever meant to be, you're going to get prescribed on this and you have to keep it for the rest of your life, right? I don't think that was ever the intent with drugs. Well, except for the opioids, which the pharmaceutical manufacturers knew how addictive those were, right? So that was a different story. I think that was pretty intentional, that this is going to be a big money maker, because once you're hooked on this, you're going to be wanting this all the time, right? So for the rest of your life, right?
Not even that. Just I know, because I've been taking painkillers for years now, that the nerve endings in my feet are starting to die. And and my doctor's like, yeah, it's common. And when he said it, like, and I love my doctor, Dr. Collins. He's fantastic, a great human being. Hi, Doc. It's when we just accept that, like, yeah, the nerve in your feet are dying next, kind of, you know what I mean? Like, as you said, it's so commonplace now that we just accept that as, well, that's okay, collateral damage, move on. And that's kind of sad, because we're not looking at a holistic kind of approach. And I know that people with diabetes, foot and skin health is really important, like critical, right?
Yeah.
Because the sores don't heal, because the circulation isn't working, and
then you start losing feet, losing limbs, right? Is what, is kind of down the road. Yeah, exactly. When you were talking about your doctor in Bentley, it reminded me, David Irvine is a guy from Alberta, really smart guy, and has all kinds of books he's written, and he's got kind of living, genuine type of messaging and courses that he offers. And his brother was a small town doctor, and and he knew everybody, right? He knew everybody, and he knew what they were doing. And so if you were walking in the door and you had some kind of an issue, he'd have a lot of insights about you already, right? Like,
Oh,
well,
yeah.
if a doctor knew how busy Corolla is every day, and then she goes to the doctor and says, "My knees are sore," and he'd say, "Uh-huh," or she, "Yeah, that's probably because you're walking 40,000 steps a day and riding 7 horses. Maybe
Yeah.
your body can't keep up at that anymore like it could 20 or 30 years ago. Maybe you need a little bit more recovery time," right? So,
Yeah, no, and there is something to be said for that healer model of caregiving. And I think that we're going to have to move there. I know when we were in Japan, they were, because the population is aging so quickly,
yeah.
right? And there's not enough young people who want to go into caregiving. Because
Mm,
caregiving is hard. It's incredibly hard. I know that, even helping me out has been really hard on my family, and
sure.
continues to be so. And so you don't see a lot of people going into caregiving. And so in Japan, what they've done is the Japanese government has opened school in the Philippines. And so they teach them not only to be a nurse, but Japanese culture, Japanese language, the tea ceremony, those types of things. And then they sponsor these Filipino nurses to move to Japan and become caregivers for senior
Mhm,
Japanese.
mm,
And, there's been protests about that. And people say, oh, well, that's a type of colonization. And, they're exploiting the Filipinos. And I don't know about that. I do know that the people that I met were really happy to have work, and that they were happy to be learning about a different culture and different ways of thinking and doing things. And they could fly back home whenever they wanted. They certainly weren't slaves. I mean,
well,
yeah,
also, like, I mean, a lot of the people from that part of the world that I've met, they have a huge obligation that they're going to support their family, right? So them
absolutely.
being working in Japan means that their family gets enough to eat and shelter and healthcare and all those kind of things, right? Because the one person gives back to that family to support them in the Philippines, as an example, right?
Well,
So,
and I'm not saying Philippines, but in a lot of countries around the world, the only job that young girls can get to help support their families is in the sex trade.
yeah,
And
yeah,
now we're talking exploitation. I mean, you can't talk
yeah,
about the sex trade without exploitation being involved.
definitely.
And in those cases, and young girls especially, because they typically won't get hired even if they could do the job, for laborer jobs or day labor, or those sort of horrible mining jobs where your life expectancy is months, not years. But so I see anything that doesn't force young girls into the sex trade to be a benefit. And maybe it's not perfect. Again, I'm not sitting judgment, but I do know that the seniors really appreciate having a young person that's interested in them and caring for them, and real relationships develop. And yes, there's going to be some problems. Yes, there's going to be some prejudice. Yes, there's going to be some exploitation. And I'm not condoning those things. But I think, compared to the exploitation of sex trade or those types of things, maybe it's an interim step. And I think sometimes we forget that things don't freeze in one place, right? Like, sometimes that middle step isn't perfect, but it'll take us to a much better place.
Well said. Well said. I think we should wrap things up here tonight, Scott.
You bet, my friend. Sorry again that I couldn't find my link and get in, and certainly I will find it on time for next week. And we'll be back to our regular programming. So look for our advertising. We'll have it out on our Facebook page. I do want to say that, and I'm going to be very careful how I say this, that I really hope that all of you out there will support the acapellist and my good friend Alan Friesen. He's going through a bunch of stuff, and I'm not going to go into it, but he's fighting the good fight, and he stood up for people that can't stand up for themselves, and he's paying a price for that, personally, financially, professionally. And yeah, so if you know Alan, step up to the plate, give him a pat on the back, because he knows he's right, on the right side of justice and looking out for people who can't look out for themselves. But it gets hard, and some days it can be really hard to be the David in David and Goliath. So you're doing the right thing, man. I just wanted to say that publicly.
Thank you. That's very kind of you. I got to tell you that yesterday I freaked my bride out because I was like about 2 or 3 hours. I was like depressed. And
Oh,
then she got really depressed when she saw I was depressed. But anyways, it was only a temporary thing. I talked to some people. I talked to, people in my life like you who always kind of build me up and buoy me up and say, it's going to be all right. Don't worry. You got this, buddy. So I very much appreciate. I have so many caring humans in my life that are supportive. I'm just like overwhelmed, and they're certainly coming to the fore. So yes.
well, and that's because you've given so much. And we've always talked about that, right? If you want to build up hope, if you want to build up happiness, you want to build up your health, give. That's the point that anyone can start at. And when you don't think you have anything to give, you probably have the most to give. Because when you don't have anything to give, you're creative, you're open to new ideas. I don't have any money, I don't have anything to give you, but here, let me give you a hug.
Mhm.
And sometimes, that hug is exactly what that person needs to not end their life that night, or whatever's going on in their world.
Before the show started, I was at this BNI mixer thing down at Honker's Pub in Erie. Vicky Vanden Hoek, that amazing place that she has, and she's a force, that Vicky. Anyways, I must have hugged, I don't know, 15 people while I was there.
Nice.
So I got my hugs in today, that's for sure. So
Excellent. Well, to our listeners and people out there, Alan's fighting a good fight. And if you see him and he doesn't look like his usual amazing, super powered self, just give him a hug, man. He doesn't always have to be the one giving it out. Sometimes our dear friend needs a hug back, just to let him know that the world is okay and all is right in heaven and earth. So I'll sign us out there from the Acapellas, my good friend Alan Friesen, and myself, Scott Sweetman. Be healthy, happy, and hopeful until next week, when we join ourselves again to talk about all the great stuff that we have and share as people on Earth.
beautiful.
Take care, everyone.
Get a Matson to our Indigenous brothers and sisters. See ya.
Bye, everyone.